The Orphans of Simitra. Chapter 18. Mina'S return. Rowan Barbadu and Porphyros were down the Cannebier, that white and splendid avenue leading to the sea, of which Marseilles is so proud. They had parked the car a little way off, and come on foot to seek out the shipping office. Porphyros was silent, nor did he take any pleasure in the lively scene, the bright colors, the sun, or the salt sea smells. "You think it's near here, Monsieur Barbadu?" After several inquiries, they found the company's office, and recognized it by the Norwegian flag. Porphyros hesitated on the threshold. Suppose the boat had been shipwrecked? Or merely delayed a few hours, or even days, because of storms? That did sometimes happen, or so he believed. He was getting too worked up, he just could not wait any longer. The clerk behind the counter answered to in Barbadu. "Yes, the Lofoten is expected today. Pier number 2. Any delay?" "None at all. She should berth at 4 p.m. Porphyros breathed again. Only 2 hours to go, and then she would be there. For Mina was on board. There could be no doubt about that. According to the telegram they had received, she had left Bergen, the big Norwegian port, 5 days before. He had read that telegram over and over again, as he had reread the letter, before he could bring himself to believe it. And to make assurance doubly sure, he was carrying it now, all crumpled up in his hand. He wondered whether Mina was changed. He knew she was in good health now, but he also knew that she had been ill, very seriously ill. Every second or so he looked at his watch, one he had bought with his tips. How he wished he could push the hands along. "Monsieur Barbadu, shall we go down to the quay?" "There's plenty of time, Porphyros." "What could we do there?" "The quay's not at all interesting." Maybe the quay was not interesting, but the busy main roads were a long way from the port, and what if the Lofoten were early? Yielding to his entreaties, Rowan Barbadu led him toward the sea. Porphyros jumped every time he heard a siren hoot in the distance. He wished he could be whisked away to the top of that white hill, so that he could watch the boat in the distance drawing near. Monsieur Barbadu and he walked up and down the endless quays to kill time, but if ever they drew too far away from pier number 2, Porphyros' steps lagged, and in Barbadu turned back with a smile. 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. The boat came through the harbor channel. It was only a small tug. 6 o'clock. The church of Notre Dame de la Garde was already gilded by the Sunday. Porphyros looked up at the sky was so clear. At last, behind the causeway, a siren hooted in the distance. Pier number 2, that until then had been deserted, suddenly came to life. The white tips of 2 masts could be seen coming slowly forward. There she was. The Lofoten had just entered the channel, and was tacking about to come in. She was a long cargo boat with a black hull. A flag waved from the stern, a blue cross on a red ground. Why was she coming in so slowly? People could be seen leaning over the port side. "Mina, where was mine?" Porphyros gripped in Barbadu's hand until he nearly crushed it. "Why isn't she on deck? Why doesn't she come down?" Rowan made no reply. He was as anxious as if he were meeting his own daughter. Passengers and sailors were going up and down the gangplank. Rowan went forward and called to one of them, but the man did not understand French and only pointed to another sailor in a gold-brigged cap. Rowan Barbadu went up to him and asked whether a girl named Marina Pedagos was on board. Porphyros began to tremble. The officer smiled. "Ah, you're the people who've come to meet her. Come." They followed him. "Was she ill, since she wasn't on deck?" The officer halted and pointed. "There she island." Porphyros sprang forward. He could hardly recognize his sister. Her hair was long and braided, and she wore a woolen dress with long sleeves, in spite of the warm sun. She had not seen her brother's arrival. As she turned around, a little cry escaped her and she grew pale. "Porphyros!" She flung herself into his arms. They hugged each other for a long time, as if to make sure that they really had found each other again. Then Porphyros put his hands on his sister's shoulders and drew back to see better. Enormous tears were running down her thin, pale cheeks. It was obvious from her looks that she had been very ill. She kept on saying, "Porphyros! You're here! You're here!" And then she said, "How tall you've grown, you're a man now." During this time, Rowan Barbadu was in the captain's cabin, for the captain had taken charge of the little girl, and looked after her during the crossing. Once the last formalities had been arranged, they all disembarked. After all this time, Mina had almost forgotten the French she had learned at school in Kruinen, and was speaking Norwegian, which is very much more like Dutch. She spoke in Greek to her brother, to ask Monsieur Barbadou to forgive them for it. The car was parked nearby, but Mina wanted to walk about a little on firm land, so as to get her balance back after the exhaustion of the journey and the rolling of the boat. It took so long, Porphyros, I began to believe I should never get here. You've no idea how enormous the sea is. I can't tell you how glad I was just now when we came in sight of this town all shining white. It looked like Greece. It nearly is Greece, Mina. You'll see. Dusk had fallen on the great Mediterranean town, a shining dusk still glowing from the golden sun. They settled themselves in tow in Barbadou's car, which may not have been very new, but was certainly very comfortable, and quite dazzling everywhere, for on the previous day Porphyros had polished it till it shone. Monsieur Barbadou sat at the wheel, while the two children snuggled into the back, sitting as close together as they could, in spite of the heat. "Have we far to go?" asked Mina. "About an hour by road, and all the way along you'll see olive trees and holm oaks and cypresses. Like at home." "Like at home, Mina." She sighed blissfully, tired but happy. Whenever Porphyros freed his hand to point something out to her, she seized it again quickly. From time to time they turned to each other and smiled. Hundreds of questions were trembling on Porphyros' lips, but not now. He did not want to tire Mina too much. Yet he still knew practically nothing. Everything had happened so quickly. The hospital at Bergen had hurried things up so that the little girl could take advantage of this unique opportunity of getting to Marseilles. He began to talk about the house awaiting his sister, about Monsieur and Madame Barbadou. "You'll see, Mina, they're just as nice as Mr. and Mrs. Van Hoolen. Do you know, I feel now as though I'd always lived there. I wouldn't ever want to go anywhere else. Not even to Greece." "I don't think so. We've no one there anymore, apart from Zymes, who still writes to me while here. Do you remember those French people who were camping in Holland, by the farm?" "Of course I do. I found them again. They live quite near. We'll go and see them. Aunt Marie hasn't forgotten you." "Aunt Marie," said Mina. "I've often thought about her." When Barbadou was driving along at a good speed. Night was falling. The cars that passed them had their headlights on. The fields that were golden only a short time before turned to misty mauve to blue-gray. Suddenly the car drew up. "Where are we?" asked anxiously Mina. "Home, of course." And Porphyros' tone was joyous. Madame Barbadou was waiting for the travelers, a little worried because they were so late. She took Mina into her arms and kissed her warmly, with tears in her eyes. The table was all laid, with a beautiful nosegay of flowers in the center. Porphyros himself had chosen the menu, and Mina saw everything she loved most: olives, anchovies, and raw beans. But the little girl was not hungry. She felt as though the floor were pitching under her feet, and that her stomach was shipwrecked. Even so, she could not resist the shining black olives, and Porphyros was beside himself with joy. He kept looking across at tow in Barbadou and his wife as though to say, "You see, no one else had any hope, but I was right." He had moved out so that his sister could have the nearest room, as it was called. When Mina found herself lying between the cool sheets, she felt a wonderful peace steal over her. She looked at her brother. "You don't want to tire me, do you, Porphyros? But I know what you're hoping for. You want me to tell you all about it, don't you?" "Not tonight, Mina. You're too exhausted." "I feel fine." "Poor Mina. You've had an awful time, haven't you?" She sighed. "Yes, awful. But it's behind me now." She felt silent, as though she were putting her memories together. Then she began to tell the whole story, sometimes full of grief, sometimes falling silent, or sighing, or even weeping a little. "Remember that dreary autumn day when I stayed at the farm while you went to Kruinen with Pete?" "I remember it, Mina, as if it were yesterday. For months on end I was sorry I went off and left you alone that afternoon. I ought to have guessed I was terribly unhappy because of that letter from Greece telling us we must wait till the following summer. I thought we should have to run away, Porphyros. You do believe that?" "Of course. I stayed with Johanna, and helped to make Pete's birthday cake. When she had put the cake in the oven, I went out. It was quite warm, and the sky wasn't as great as usual. I walked along the road to get some fresh air, and to try to get rid of my sad thoughts. Porphyros. As I was looking toward the sea, I saw mountains. Mountains. The long chain of mountains with rosy pink snow on the summit. It looked just like Pindus in winter when the sun reaches only the highest parts. There aren't any mountains in Holland, Mina. It was only clouds, of course, but I felt so happy. I truly thought they were mountains. So I walked along the dike toward the sea. I went along the beach, on the wet sand. Suddenly I realized night was coming on. The cloud mountains had vanished, but I thought I could see them still. I thought I should find them again, quite near, on the other side of the water. So I went on walking into the night. I didn't know what I was doing anymore. Boats were dancing on the black water in a little harbor. I unmoored one, a very small one. You did. But you've always been so scared of water. I don't know now how I could have done it. But, at that time, I was so longing to see those mountains again, and they were only just out of reach. I jumped into the boat, and the current swept me away. I didn't know where it was taking me. The wind got up and the boat bobbed you up and down on the waves. Weren't you afraid? Not at first. It was quite pleasant being rocked like that. But soon the wind grew stronger, and the waves higher. Water rose up and slapped over me. Then I was terribly afraid. The boat might capsize. I shouted as loud as I could, but the storm drowned my voice. Twice huge waves knocked me over in the boat. The third time I twisted my ankle, and couldn't get up again. I lay in the bottom of the boat, in the water slapping against the planks. I shall never forget the noise of hot water. Sometimes, at night, I still hear it. It was awful. I cowered down in the boat and thought I was going to die. And I thought of you, how you would look for me everywhere, and how sad you would be. Poor little Mina. When morning came, I was frozen. The storm was still raging. There was water everywhere and nothing but water. I didn't know whether I was dead or still alive. Sometimes I tried to call for help, but there was so more strength in my voice. Hours went by while I shivered in that boat half filled with water. I was terribly thirsty, but I couldn't drink sea water. Oh, Porphyros. I wasn't looking for mountains in the sky anymore. And then in the afternoon I thought I saw a big black dot in the distance, and that it was growing larger. The storm had died down a little. I tried to lift myself up to signal to it, but my ankle hurt so much that I fell back. However, the ship had seen me, and came near. It looked like a great black monster. They sent off a long boat to row up to me. 2 men took hold of me to lift me out, but at the moment a great wave come and one of them staggered and let me go. I fell back and knocked my head against something pointed. I think it was an anchor. My head felt as though it had been crushed like a nut with a stone. I didn't see or hear anything more. Mina stopped and caught her brother looking for traces of the wound. You can hardly see anything now, she said. My hair hides the scar, but the point of the anchor made a deep hole. If you touch here, you can feel it. She took hold of her brother's hand to guide it. Porphyros shuddered, his eyes filled with tears. Poor little Mina. The child smiled gently as though to say, don't worry about it anymore, Porphyros, it's all over and done with. After a silence, she went on with her story. It was only later that I knew what happened after I fell, a long time afterward, when I woke up in a white room in a hospital. I was at Bergen, where the Norwegian ship set me down. Do you know where Bergen is? I looked it up on the map, Mina. It's a long way from Greece. They operated on me at once in that hospital. But when I came out of the ether, I couldn't remember anything. It was like rubbing a rag over your slate at school. There was nothing left. I'd even forgotten how to speak French and Dutch, and no one there knew any Greek. Still, one day they did discover an old lady in the town who had lived in Greece when her husband was, what's the word? Oh yes, consul, that's it, consul in Athens. They asked her to question me. I didn't know my name, nor the name of our village. It was as though a big black curtain prevented me from finding what I was looking for. It was like that for months. How unhappy you must have been, Mina. No, I wasn't, since I couldn't remember anything. I only began to be unhappy when my memory came back to me, quite suddenly, only a couple of weeks ago. I was in the hospital yard. The old lady, who often came to see me, she was very sweet, had brought me a book of stories she'd sent for especially to Greece. All at once I saw a name in it, your name, Porphyros. In an instant the great black curtain was torn down. I saw Simitra, Lycira, and Cruinan again. I heard your voice, and the voices of Sinis and Pete and Johanna. My heart gave a great leap, my legs began to tremble, I fainted. But I was well again. That same evening I told the old lady everything. The following morning the doctor phoned Holland right away. Oh, Porphyros, I can't tell you how unhappy I was then. I was as ashamed as if it was my own fault that I had lost my memory. I felt afraid of myself, as if I was a monster. Above all, I thought of you. Oh, Porphyros, I felt so dreadful. Luckily that stage didn't last long, for I thought I would die of it. Oh, Porphyros, forgive me. Forgive me. Mina began to cry. Porphyros kissed her on her forehead, her hair. There's nothing to forgive, Mina. You haven't done anything. Just forget all this terrible nightmare. Think only how we're together again, and that nothing can ever separate us now. You thought I was dead, didn't you? Everyone else quiet when I talked about you. But I never really lost hope. She was exhausted when she had finished her adventures. But she still wanted to know what had happened to her brother through those 8 long months. Now you tell me. Not tonight, Mina. You're too tired. And it would take too long. Go off to sleep quickly now. If you do, you'll be ready to enjoy the wonderful Provençal sun much earlier. Ah, the sun. I missed it all the time I was in Norway. She felt silent. Porphyros held her hand until her eyes closed and her breathing grew slow and regular. Only then did he go off into his own room. When she awoke next morning, the little girl looked as astonished as her brother had 3 months before, when he saw the snowy blossoms of an almond tree in flower. Grasshoppers, she cried out, listening hard. It sounds like grasshoppers. Yes, that's right, it is grasshoppers. She turned her head and saw her brother. She hardly recognized him. See, my working clothes, my red uniform of Simitra. Only it's turned blue. Do you think it suits me? She smiled at him. It's not so showy as the one the dressmaker made at Simitra, but it's much better cut. And it's not just for show, either, I can't tell you. The Emperor's filling station is a busy concern. I sell more than 250 gallons of gas a day. And as for lubricating, draining tanks, general repairs. If only our poor Papa Christopher could see it. If he could have known that an emperor's car had stopped here. An emperor. He even slept in this very room. An emperor. Tell me about it, Porphyros. You shall have the whole story. Do you feel well enough to get up? I was terribly tired yesterday evening, but I'm not ill. A quarter of an hour later she joined her brother in the kitchen. Madame Barbadieu received her with open arms and was glad to see that she looked rested and in good spirits. She gave her goat's milk and olives for breakfast. Everything I love most, the little girl said, kissing her to show her gratitude. The 2 children breakfasted together, for though Porphyros had been up for hours, he would not eat without her. Mina had recovered her normal appetite. This is much nicer than the dried fish roes I ate in Norway. Porphyros was dying to show her his domain. Do come and see, Mina. Outside, the summer sun had invaded every field. Mina stretched out her arms as though she was trying to catch an armful of sunbeams. This blue sky. Is it always so wonderful? Always, even in winter. A long, uninterrupted line of cars flowed by like a river. Now that summer had come, most of the cars were making for the south, traveling toward the sun, so worshipped by dwellers in northern climes. With his sister looking on, Porphyros refueled 2 foreign cars, an English one and a Belgian. Laughing, he came over to his sister. Did you learn any Norwegian while you were there? A little. Good, now we can add it to the placards. I should think we'll be the only filling station in the whole of Provence where so many languages are spoken. Then he led her into the garage, and showed her how the car jack worked, and the grease gun. She was full of admiration for his pyramid of oil drums, skillfully arranged the way he had learned from the garage owner at Cruanan. He was conscious of his sister's admiring eyes fixed upon high, and he nearly burst with joy. "See, Mina, this is what I dreamed of. And it's all come true." The little girl smiled, then her face clouded over. "Monsieur and Madame Barbadou are awfully nice. But do you think they will keep us both?" "Don't you worry, Mina. Remember that I'm earning my own living now, and Monsieur Barbadou is pleased with my work. Everything's arranged as far as you're concerned. To begin with, you'll go to school. You'll learn some French, since you've almost forgotten it. Later, you can help Madame Barbadou in the kitchen, since you like cooking. But all this is on one condition." "What?" "That you are happy here. No more going off in boats." "Oh, Porphyros, how mean you are. I know already that we'll find ourselves at home here. When I was on the boat coming here, I was still afraid, because I felt there was only one beautiful country in the world, and that one ours. But here you've found work, you're already at home, and I shall see Anne-Marie again." She paused a moment. "I often think of Holland, and I feel ashamed. What must Pete and Johanna have thought of me? Yet I liked them so much. I would like to see Mr. and Mrs. Van Hoolen again someday to ask them to forgive me. Maybe one day they'll pass through this place. Sometimes you'd think the whole of Holland was streaming by to enjoy sunbathing by the sea. Oh, I'd be so glad if that happened. And I'd like to see the Brunos again, you know, those people who took me in and were so good to me in Paris. Perhaps Monsieur Bruno will take this road one day with his truck." Just then a car drove in and drew up in front of the little flower-decked platform where the gasoline pumps stood in a row. "5 gallons, youngsters. Regular or super? Do you want any oil? Allow me to wipe the windshield." Mina smiled, very proud of this big brother, so self-reliant and so well able to look after her. In spite of all the disasters that had overtaken him, he had kept his trust in life,